we gained navigation rights to the Mississippi River. We had all the rights we wanted here, right? But the key was we got, I would say a better answer to that was we received the right of deposit to be able to take our ships in and out of the port of New Orleans. Which, what difference did that make? When instead of taking our crops overland over the mountains, we could do what? Go out of New Orleans and go around to the east. So that advantage would be that we received the right of deposit to sail freely without charge into New Orleans, duty-free, right? Tax-free into New Orleans. Okay. Olivia, tell me one of the two major accomplishments by President Washington and his administration during his 2 terms in office. Give me a major accomplishment.
He organized machinery of government.
He organized a good machinery of government. How about another one, JC? What else did he do that was considered a positive thing?
I'm sorry, I'm completely lost.
Okay, during his 2 terms in office, Washington's administration accomplished 4 major goals. This is under the subtopic President's Farewell Address. And Olivia said that he had organized the machinery of government. There's actually 4 things he did. Anybody have another?
Okay, he avoided war with Great Britain.
When war could least be afforded. That's important you add that. He avoided war with Great Britain when the war could least be afforded. Okay, Kezia, do you have another one?
He gained some things back from the French.
Not from the French.
From Spain.
Spain. He received some benefits from Spain, which we just talked about. And what was the last one, Dave?
He set the new nation on solid financial ground.
He set the new nation on solid financial ground. So, he helped set the new nation on solid foundations financially. He organized the machinery of government. He avoided war with Great Britain when war could least be afforded. And he received benefits from Spain. Okay, on the other hand, Sheriff, tell me one of the 2 major concerns he had when he left office.
He did not like the bitter arguments between Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson.
That's right. Give me the other one, Delaney. The other concern he had. He was concerned about our relationship with who?
Foreign countries.
With other foreign countries. So don't get those mixed up. He had 2 major concerns. He was troubled by the sharp, bitter arguments between Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson, and he was concerned about the relations of the United States with foreign countries. With that said, Macklin, give me one of the things he urged American people to avoid when he left office during his farewell address. He said that you shouldn't do these 2 things. The new American government should not do these 2 things. They should not do what?
I'm not sure. That's a big guess.
Yes. You can't be ridiculed too badly. So what did he think we shouldn't do when he left office? And we did it almost immediately afterwards. Elise? What did we do that he said we should almost immediately?
Any permanent alliances.
Well, I'm not sure that's the right answer. I'm not sure we did that right after he left office. But one of the answers is we should not sign any more permanent alliances with any foreign countries because we got in trouble with the Treaty of 1778. But what was the other one? Remember that one? Go ahead. Don't form any political parties, and we did it bang. As soon as he got out of office, we formed the Federalist Party and the Republican Party. Okay, why don't you give me one philosophical difference, Lauren, between the Federalist Party and the Republican Party? One philosophical difference. And so if I'm asking for a comparison, you would say the Federalist Party had little faith in the ability of the average person to govern themselves, while the Republican Party had... Okay, go ahead.
Well, the Republicans had the faith in the average person to do what.
Okay, so The Federalist Party had little faith in the ability of the average person to govern themselves, whereas the Republican Party had great faith in the average person to govern themselves. That's one philosophical difference. Ivan, give me another one.
The Federalists gave power to the wealthy, and the Republicans gave power to the people.
Okay, the Federalist Party wanted to give power to wealthy people, whereas the Republican Party felt that all people should have equal power. Just so happened that 90% of people in the country are not wealthy, but that's what he said, okay? How about another one there? Emily?
The Federalist Party wanted to create a strong federal government under control of the wealthy, and then the Republicans wanted a
Strong, the opposite of federal would be state governments. So the Federalist Party wanted to create a strong federal government, and the Republican Party wanted to develop strong state governments, okay? The Federalist Party supported the National Bank of the United States. The Republican Party did not support the Bank of the United States. I think we can go with that. You're going to need to know 3 philosophical differences. What did we get, 4 there? Okay? All right. Now, let's go back to the election of 1796. If you want to just find that in your notes, it might be easy. The election of 1796. If everybody would turn to that. The election of 1796. Okay, can you tell me, Hunter, what the unusual circumstance was in the election of 1796? What was the unusual circumstance of that? No, that was the unusual circumstance of 1796. Remember, in that election, the top vote getter was named president, and the second highest vote getter was named vice president. And it was kind of expected that most people would vote on the same ticket. So go ahead.
Adams was elected, and then they had a Republican vice president.
Right. The unusual circumstance around the election of 1796 is you had a Federalist president and a Republican vice president, because people did not vote on party lines. They voted, and Adams had the most votes, electoral votes, and Jefferson had the second most. So you had a Federalist president and a Republican vice president. That would be the unusual circumstances in that election. Now, if we move to the election of 1800, what was the unusual thing about that? I'm going back to Siobhan because I know she knows this because you already kind of answered it. So what was the unusual circumstance in the election of 1800? They still went with the most votes was president and the second most votes was vice president, and people did vote along party lines this time, which they asked them to do. But what was the unusual thing about the end result of the election of 1800 when it came to electoral votes? Well, you're ahead of yourself here. Talk about the presidential election. What was the unusual thing about how that resulted? There you go, they tied. Who tied? Jefferson and Burr tied, and so it went. Okay, and because of the influence of Alexander Hamilton, even though most members of the House wanted Aaron Burr to be president, Alexander Hamilton talked the House into electing Thomas Jefferson because he thought he was the lesser of 2 evils. So you're going to have to be able to write that out so that somebody like Mr. Smith, who doesn't know anything about the election of 1800 because he has a different major, if he read that, he would understand. Don't write it saying, oh, Mr. Drill figured it out. You write that as if you're trying to explain it to someone that knows nothing about it. So let's go back to 1796. The unusual thing about 1796 is that the top vote getter was going to be president, the second vote getter was going to be vice president. It was expected that people would vote along party lines. If they were Federalists, they would vote Federalist. If they weren't, they'd vote Republican. What happened is a Federalist, John Adams, got the most votes, and a Republican, Thomas Jefferson, got the second most votes. So you had a Federalist president and a Republican vice president. That's unusual. In the election of 1800, people did vote on party lines. The thing that was weird about it is the Republican candidates, Jefferson and Burr, both received the same amount of votes, and so we had a tie. The rule then is it went to the House of Representatives, in which really the House of Representatives would have probably favored voting for Aaron Burr. But Alexander Hamilton, who had much favor in the House, convinced the House into voting for Thomas Jefferson because he thought Jefferson was the lesser of two evils between Jefferson and Burr, and that's what happened. So those are the unusual circumstances there. Okay? All right. You're going to also need to know the 3 ultimatums that French diplomats X, Y, and Z gave American representatives in 1791. Anybody know what those are? What were those insulting demands? Casey, do you have one, my dear? An insulting ultimatum that French diplomats X, Y, and Z gave American representatives in 1797.
The US had to pay $250,000.
Why? That was the question, right? So when he called and said, yes, we paid you money for really nothing. They're asking you to pay what? So I don't have to bribe you for this answer. A bribe, yeah. Okay, X, Y, and Z insulted American diplomats by saying that they would have to pay a bribe of $250,000 to France. What was the next one, Pete, remember?
The U.S. must publicly apologize about the U.S. remarks that Adams made about making his France in a speech to Congress.
Perfect, yeah. They want a public apology on the part of President Adams for making negatory remarks against France in his speech to Congress. And Morgan, what's the last ultimatum? I kind of missed you.
We were
They were forcing us to loan them money. All insulting demands. Okay, Morgan, since I ignored you, I'm going to ask you this. Tell me everything that you know possible about the Whiskey Rebellion. And you can use your notes. And you don't have to if you don't want to.
Alexander Hamilton placed a tax on
Well, he didn't. He convinced Congress to pass a law that,
lower tax from beer
well, they're going to put a tax on distilled
alcohol,
liquor, okay?
which doesn't make the point.
It was. And who were the corn growers in this country?
Settlers and frontiers.
Yeah, Western farmers, right? And why in the world were they so stuck on just, why did they grow wheat, barley, and carrots and tomatoes and everything else? Why did they grow corn? Why did they just grow corn for liquor? Anybody remember that?
Because it was difficult to transport.
Yeah, by the time they, grew it and got it across the mountains on mule and wagons, it was just too hard, it was too much of a hardship, okay? And they could make corn and take the corn and put it in their stills and make distilled liquor and put it in barrels, and it'd be a lot easier, a lot less ruinage, a lot less damage, etc. Okay, so what Morgan's saying is that they put a tax on the distilled liquor and it affected mainly frontier farmers who were growing corn, right? So what did they do when they found out about this tax, Morgan?
They rebelled against it. The Washington had to send it.
What do you mean they rebelled against it, which means they didn't want it?
They wouldn't pay it.
There you go, they wouldn't pay it, okay? So they rebelled against it by not paying the tax. Go ahead.
Washington had to send frontier marshals.
Federal,
Federal marshals.
okay, to go there and collect the tax, and what happened to those poor brothers?
They got chased off.
They got chased off by armed farmers. So what did Washington do next? Well, he sent the military. How many? Anybody know? 15,000 military men or soldiers back with the federal marshals to enforce the law. And when they sent those marshals back with that $15,000 soldier support, what did the farmers do? Fought them? No, they gave up and decided to pay their tax. So here's what I'm looking for. Here's the essay question. Briefly to explain the Whiskey Rebellion. include the actions of tax taken by the federal government. That means that they put a tax on distilled liquor. Reaction to those government actions, farmers, because they were the ones that were growing corn for distilled liquor, rebelled and refused to pay the tax. Initial reaction by the federal government is they sent federal marshals over there to enforce the law, in which, well, just a second, result of those initial actions, which was they ran the federal marshals off. And final reactions by the federal government, they sent 15,000 soldiers over with the federal marshals to enforce the law, and the end result was the rebellion ended. Okay, so you need to just write that out. It'll give you it'll be written just like this. Briefly explain the Whiskey Rebellion. Include the actions of tax taken by the federal government, reaction of those governmental actions, initial reaction by the federal government, result of those initial actions, and final reactions by the federal government, and the end result. It'll kind of spell it out for you. But I want you to write that out really nice, because this is exactly what it's going to look like on your test. Here it is. Boom. Okay, there it is. That'll be worth 16 points of your test. So let's figure out what we got here. We got 42 answers at 2 points apiece is plus 16. All right, I want to show you something. I think I've got just enough time to show you this. You'll get into this next year, but a lot of our World War I veterans have either died or are dying now. And so every time a World War II veteran dies, sometimes they make a big deal out of it because they're in their 90s. So this was on the Today Show today, or Saturday, excuse me, about a World War II fighter pilot that just passed away, and I think it's a good story. It's about a minute or so long, and I think you'll really enjoy it. Emily, my dear, if you'd be kind enough to get the door and the light. Kind of a feel-good story I think you'll enjoy. Okay, here we go. Pay attention. It's very, very good.
This week we highlight another life well lived. Bob Hoover was a war hero and one of the most daring pilots ever to sit in a cockpit. Flying with the 52nd Fighter Group, Hoover flew 58 successful missions before his Spitfire was shot down by the Germans in February of 1944. He was held for 16 months in a Nazi POW camp before escaping, stealing a German plane, and flying safely into the Netherlands, where he was chased by Dutch farmers with pitchforks who thought he was a Nazi because of the markings on his plane. Hoover was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Purple Heart, just to name 2 distinctions. After the war, he became an expert test pilot, joining his friend Chuck Yeager in training to break the sound barrier. Yeager called Hoover the greatest pilot I ever saw. Hoover went on to a long career as a stunt pilot, often performing with Yeager. One of his breathtaking tricks was to cut both engines, sending his plane into a plunge before pulling up at the last second. Instead of a flight suit, Hoover flew his air shows in a suit and tie, joking, "It'll be less work for the Undertaker." Bob Hoover, an aviation legend, died this week in Los Angeles. He was 94 years old.
How about that? If you survived 58 flight missions in Europe during World War II, you survived something. I'll tell you, it was not easy to do. So